Trail and ultra runners, what is going on? What's happening? Welcome to another episode of the Koopcast, and I am back. I am back as your humble host. My name is Jason Koop. If you have not been paying attention to the podcast recently, I had two of our coaches overtake the podcast in my absence when I was out on an athlete project for the last several weeks. Thank you to coaches Stephanie Howe and AJW for taking over the podcast in my absence. Those episodes were absolutely fantastic and sometimes hilarious. I had no idea the direction that they were going to take. I gave them complete control and autonomy over the topics that they wanted to discuss and who they wanted to bring on the podcast. And you all, the audience, gave me a lot of great feedback in my absence about how much you actually liked those episodes. And I'm going to take that as a lesson moving forward and incorporate some more voices on this podcast, particularly to provide some context and commentary to a lot of the research topics that we end up talking about on this podcast. So thank you to those two individuals, Steph and AJW. I could not have done that without your help. You guys did a great job taking over the reins in my absence. But I'm back, and I'm back to talk about a topic that is very near and dear to me and something that I have constantly studied over the course of my coaching career. And that is, how do we monitor athletes and determine if they're getting better, worse, and what to do next from a training perspective? You guys know, you longtime listeners will know that we've had a lot of people on this podcast to discuss this very topic. Most recently, we had Cyan Allen talking about the wearables and Marco Altini talking about heart rate variability. And on this podcast today, I wanted to bring on co-authors of a brand new opinion piece in the journal Sports Medicine, the title of which is Integrated Proposals of Sports Monitoring, Subjective Outperforms Objective Monitoring. And the two individuals that we're going to be talking about this with today are Lluc Montull and Natàlia Balagué. They both have put together an incredible opinion piece on this that really integrates all of these different aspects of how we should look at humans as complex adaptive systems and integrate both objective and subjective types of monitoring in order to facilitate athlete progress. I love this topic because it has had a very dynamic arc over the course of my coaching career, and I have not switched back and forth, but I've definitely changed opinions on this as I have grown and developed as a coach. And we talk about that a lot during the course of this conversation. So buckle in, I'm back. Here we go. Here's my conversation all about subjective and objective monitoring with athletes and what you can do to make the most out of it with Lluc and Natàlia. Thank you guys for coming on the podcast. I've been really excited about this for a while. And this paper caught my eye. I think it was probably several weeks ago, and I really didn't get a chance to dig into it because I was on this big project in Europe. And finally, when I got the chance to dig into it, as I was mentioning to you guys off air, it really encapsulates a big arc of how I've treated my coaching practice. Where when I initially started coaching, we wanted to rely a lot on a lot of the devices and objective measures to try to quantify recovery and training load and even the cardiovascular load and the amount of kilojoules somebody was, burning and during a workout and things like that. Like, we wanted to do that because the technology and actually the ability to monitor it was relatively novel, it was relatively new. And it now, looking back on it retrospectively, that pendulum swung very far on that side of the spectrum, on that side of the objective spectrum. And it's gradually been kind of like coming back, but the forces that be, because the technology kind of keeps getting better and better and more accessible and easier to use, this objective versus subjective these objective versus subjective feedback tools are always going to have kind of a push-pull with coaches and athletes. And so I lay that out initially because I think it's a very practical paper for both athletes and coaches to look at and really think about how they're gathering information, as opposed to just gathering the information and then figuring out what to do with it afterwards. So that was my catalyst in really getting engrossed into the paper. But I want to ask from you guys' perspective, and either one of you can take the lead on this. What was your catalyst for trying to tackle this kind of really comprehensive sports science subject?
Well, I will a bit introduce myself, not much, but I've been an exercise physiologist teaching exercise physiology to university sports science students for almost 40 years. So this is a long experience. And in the beginning, I was just copying what these programs in medicine were dictating for physiology. But soon I realized that this, well, not soon, a bit later, let's say, but mainly when I was in touch with all these ideas from complex systems, I realized that really this was not the type of information and the type of education that sports scientists needed. And then we changed a lot. And in fact, now it is much more focused on what we call physiology of complex adaptive systems. So we conceive our organism in a totally different way. We have left machines aside. So, okay, this approach of classical cybernetics, thinking on all these processes, linear processes, and controllable computer metaphor ideas around how to conceive the human organism, to move to complex systems ideas with the properties of complex adaptive systems, which are mostly ignored in exercise physiology. And this has obviously many consequences for training and for practitioners in general. So coaches are usually more interested on what to do than on why to do it. And this is a big problem nowadays. So as soon as something new, as you have said, arises from technology, they like to use it, thinking that this is a better solution for. Right. And sometimes they neglect that this can be, misleading the training, and this is not always the best way to take. So I think that technological companies, of course, are centered on their economic benefits, and will always have new artifacts to use for making more easy this task. The question is if this is needed at all. And in this sense, I would say definitively it is not.
That is a perfect setup, and I think we're going to peel apart a few different pieces of that. But I want to give Lluc a chance to chime in as well. How did you initially become interested in this?
Well, I finished my PhD on May of this year, and this PhD was directed by Natàlia. And when I met Natàlia some years ago, I started to get interested in this type of topic, to understand athletes and sport and all these phenomena related to the complex adaptive systems. And she opened my mind. And at the end of this thesis period, we thought to write this paper to discuss this topic of monitoring, to discuss also these limitations of these tools that are increasing more and more every day, and they need to be rethink. We need to rethink about what and why they are used, and also we need to reevaluate the potential of subjective monitoring. And that's why we start with this paper to discuss this integrative potential of the subjective monitoring in front the objective monitoring, to make rethink athletes, coaches, but also scientists.
Of course. It's one of the things that Natàlia mentioned that really just resonated with me is that coaching and training, especially endurance sports, for whatever reason, and I don't think this is actually limited to endurance sports. I think you see this a lot in the strength power sports as well. A lot of the practice is generated from this copy paste type of mentality. And the majority of that is driven from the top down. So here's what these athletes do at the Olympic or the international level, or in the prototypical case in endurance sports, here's what the Kenyans and the Ethiopians do. And let's translate this down to whatever level it is, the collegiate level, the recreational level, even kind of the beginning level. And while there's value in doing that, because they're obviously successful, at least in part, because of what they're doing, right? That's just a part of it, just what they're doing. There's obviously natural ability and luck and all these other things that go into sport. The real failure of that copy and paste mentality is it takes away or it mutes the ability to think for oneself. And you're automatically translating something that somebody else has done and linearly applying it in a fashion where you think it's going to apply to everybody else. And you highlight this failure of linear thinking a lot within the paper. The original way that I was thinking about it was when I first started coaching, the thing that became very prevalent in the early 2000s was the ability to try to track and monitor training load. So we're going to quantify this in some way, either with a TRIMP score or with a power meter using training stress score. And there's all these different ways, especially in the endurance sports, to actually do that. And what ended up happening from a coaching and a training perspective is we ended up taking that very simplistic load that we were trying to quantify with athletes and trying to extrapolate it into the entire training plan and then extrapolate it into the adaptive process. So much so that the predominant training tool that a lot of coaches and athletes use today, and this is the one that we use because I think it's the best, is called Training Peaks. They very erroneously and egregiously, in my opinion, synonymously use these two terms: chronic training load, which is a representation of 6 weeks of this training stress score that they've kind of coined, so to speak. They synonymously interchange that word with fitness. And even when you log into the tool today, you'll see chronic training load and fitness used in a synonymous fashion, and it is not. The amount of training load that you have is not completely equal to the fitness that you're going to reap from it. And I think it goes back to your two earlier points, this fact that humans are complex adaptive systems, and you can't simply synonymously equate training load to fitness and the linear relationship of the increase in that load to their future fitness. So anyway, you guys highlighted that in a much more global example, which I'm going to let y'all take the lead on. But the reason that it resonated with me is because I had this very visceral experience of where us as coaches, we fell into that trap. We fell into that trap and saying, okay, we need to get our athletes' chronic training load as high as possible because we're thinking erroneously that is going to equate 1-to-1 in a linear fashion to their fitness. And even to this day, I got a new athlete just last week, and he was asking me, well, how do I increase my fitness line? Right, which is this little blue line on the Training Peaks chart. And so then I had to go into this whole, layperson's view of it's not synonymous as fitness and things like that. So anyway, I want to keep you guys' perspective on that, the fact that humans are complex and adaptive systems, and we can't necessarily take one or even several variables and start to equate them to how they're going to perform on race day, or even what their fitness is going to be representative of.
Well, I would say that this idea about machines has many wrong assumptions, oversimplified and wrong assumptions. One is that we are independent of our context, and we are not. So we are always thinking about the performer environment system. So the impact of this personal internal environment and external environmental context is very important, but also the dynamic nature of such contexts. So such internal and external contexts are changing all the time.
Right.
So this interaction makes that, we cannot fix any value, any quantitative value, as we can do with machines that have their maximums, their tops. We can decide about, let's say, thresholds. If this point is reached, if its critical value is reached, then this is happening, and so on. So this is typical machine behavior, but we are not that. So we have totally different properties. First, it is that we are very much depending on the context, and we cannot ignore this. Another is that we are nonlinear systems. We have nonlinear, non-proportional responses to the inputs, and that we self-organize. So we do not need to any prescription or from internal or external agents to say how we should respond. So we have pleiotropy, degeneracy properties. So we have a full amount of properties that are ignored, totally ignored, and are playing a very important role in these things. So, for instance, these ratios, workloads fixed. For who they are relevant for which person? For a mean, it is any person. A mean for this study. So this is not the way to deal with adaptive complex systems. So simply it is too much simplified and needs to be updated from the theoretical point of view first. So these beliefs, these lack of confidence of coaches, on self-confidence on their methodologies also is based on low education. So in fact, they are very much based on experiential knowledge, but not on scientific knowledge, not on updated knowledge. And then this is very much affecting the athletes. And I think this should be changed. So now we are cooperating with a professional doctorate in Limerick, that it is for innovate and for helping coaches to coach together with making their careers together with this doctorate, professional doctorate. So thinking at the same time that they do the things, updating their beliefs, their assumptions, and so on. So I think this is very important, these profiles of coaches that are also skeptical and all the time thinking how to improve, how to develop themselves, and not just relying on their experiences on successful practitioners, which is it is too simplistic.
100%. Luc, you want to jump in there?
Yeah. I want to say that even technology is developing, like big data, that can integrate many variables along the time. As Natàlia said, we are nonlinear, and if we are nonlinear, we are unpredictable. And for example, after collecting the heart rate of an athlete during the whole season in a determinate condition, an algorithm could probably define more or less which is the heart rate in the same condition. However, it would be impossible to exactly predict the dynamic response of heart rate or any other psychobiological response in a precise way. For that reason, it's necessary that athletes and coach contextualize values of objective monitoring and don't use them as gold standard, as a linear tool in that way.
And we've seen like countless examples of this. The one that I wanted to bring up was heart rate right there, where if you track an athlete throughout the course of a year, it's I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's extremely difficult to pinpoint what heart rate they should be training at for what physiological zone throughout the year, because there's so much context, as Natàlia mentioned, that's associated with that you can't quantify, or is at least very difficult to quantify. The context piece of it becomes really important, I think, when we talk about actually like real people who have a lot of variables around their lives. And the one that the listeners will be familiar with, to further emphasize Natalia's point, that we talked about a lot on this podcast, is just the concept of a training camp. So when we bring just our normal everyday athletes that work for a living, they're the breadwinner, they work 40 to 50 hours a week at kind of whatever desk job that they have. When we bring them into our training camps that they come to for fun, right? It's an enjoyable activity for them. They either triple or quadruple their volume over the course of a 3 or 4 day period. They'll do 2 weeks worth of volume in 3 or 4 days. And the relevant point there is the only way that they are able to do that is because they've changed the context of their life, right? They've gotten rid of their 9-to-5 job to the extent that they can. They're in a different environment where all they can do is kind of eat, sleep, and train. And if you were to lay that training program out on paper without the context of the athlete going to a training camp and things like that, it would just look absurd. Right? Everybody looking at that without the context behind it would say 100% you're going to get this athlete hurt or overtrained or injured or kind of something. This is dumb, right? It's absolutely dumb. Yet, time and time again, and I've not had one single person, despite hundreds of people coming into this camp, ever get hurt from it. They all have a superior adaptive response, even when you consider the total training load, which is the more important part for athletes anyway. They have a superior training response, and it's all due to the context. Now, that's an extremely polarized example of how context matters, right? Normal life into a training life, but there are all these other different like nuanced levels of where that context matters as well. And Luke, to your point, I don't know if a machine can learn that, right? Because it is on its face infinitely complex.
I would add to the physical context the social context as well. So we never behave the same in one social context in another social context in life. So it happens the same. So the fact to train together and so on, so has many effects. And what is key point here for highlighting the relevance of subjective monitoring is the fact that we are made of trillions of intelligent pieces. So trillions of cells which behave in an intelligent way, which are able to perceive, which are able to decide, and are able to act, accordingly. So, and that contain billions of years of experience stored in their DNAs. So imagine how intelligent we are. So every small piece of us is intelligent. So, and this will never be, well, I cannot say this, but let's say that artificial intelligence, it's very far from it. It's made by screws, cables. I mean, these pieces are not intelligent for now. So we are far more intelligent. However, we should believe it, and we should be aware of it, and we should exploit that, and we should even be aware that we can learn in addition. So not only that we are so intelligent, but we can learn. So imagine how, far away we are from machines, and how much we can trust on these integrative possibilities of our intelligence. So this is absolutely privileged, exceptional. So it is pity that we don't take advantage of it. and you reply.
In my personal monitoring process with athletes, I get this automated email anytime an athlete completes a workout, and it gives me a summary of basically what they call the hero metrics, and then their post-activity comments, and it's in that order. I get distance, average heart rate, elevation gain, power if it's a cyclist, and things like that all in one screen. And then below that, and I'm emphasizing the word below intentionally, the second part of that summary, that workout summary, are their post-activity comments. For years, I have lobbied to get those flipped, because I want to see the post-activity comments first, the subjective feedback, and then I want the objective metrics second, because that's the way my brain prioritizes them. Or that's the way, and it didn't always used to be like that. I used to always just think, how many kilojoules did you do? What was your average heart rate? Okay, let's figure out things from there. But now I want it flipped. But before we get into this too, so I guess what I'm saying, Natàlia, is you're speaking my language with that. Before we get into this too granularly, though, I want to set this up because the listeners are going to be a little bit unfamiliar with what the real difference between subjective and objective monitoring is, and what the advantages and disadvantages of both of those systems are, so that they can ultimately internalize for themselves, or if the coaches are listening out there, how are they going to monitor training for their athletes, and what should they put priority on, and how should they actually do so. So let's set it up from a framework perspective first, and you guys can handle this because this is the beef of the paper that we're talking about, and the links to that will be in the show notes. I'll let you guys kind of take over how to orchestrate this subjective versus objective, and how it should be meaningful to coaches and athletes.
Okay, I will go first with that. As we said, one of the main properties of complex adaptive systems is this nonlinear dynamics. But these nonlinear dynamics emerge from the multi-level interaction, as Natàlia said, from cells, tissues, organs, and also the interaction with the environment. And this can be reflected, for example, when some muscles compensate differently among them, when we have fatigue, or when we are recovered, and this change the theoretical assumptions and the methodological data analysis techniques. Well, more than change, these techniques and assumptions should adapt to these properties. And objective monitoring is not actually is ignoring these kind of properties, as we said, and cannot provide an integrative tool of integrative information of this system. And in contrast, subjective monitoring is at the moment the most integrative tool that we have, and compress the multiple dimensions, physiological, psychological, sociological dimensions of the complex adaptive systems. And this information should be used for coaches, for athletes to co-adapt, to co-design the training process, and we have to start from reevaluating the potential of subjective monitoring and educate athletes to enhance their awareness, to be able to detect change of the organism, change of the environment, then can affect their health and performance states. And in this way, coaches should break with rigid and static plannings, periodizations, and accordingly do not rely only on objective data. And as you said, this objective data should be complementary to the subjective information of athletes. And for that reason, athletes should actively participate in designs and adapting to adapt the training of every day and every session. And yeah, we have to use these perceptions as the most valuable tool to co-design and co-adapt such training processes.
Let me kind of propose something that I know there's going to be people listening to this are screaming into their car audio systems or their headphones or whatever it is. And because one of the pieces of criticism of objective feedback is that it includes the user's bias in it. If I tell myself I feel good, I'm feeling good. And there can be a division, right? A divide between what the objective data is saying and the athlete is actually providing feedback on. And we see this all the time. And it's very simplistically put in like heart rate variability data, where we can see heart rate variability tank and the athlete is saying, hey, I'm good. I can kind of still train. And I want you to kind of walk through how users and how athletes and coaches can kind of reconcile that, because it happens all the time where these two monitoring systems, not that they are all going to agree all the time because they're multifactorial, they're multidimensional, but there can be this fundamental divide between the feedback that you're getting from an objective standpoint and the feedback that you're getting from a subjective standpoint. And the critics of overly using subjective feedback will say, well, it's inherently biased because of the user's experience. So I want to know what you have to say to
that. Of course, beliefs are very much influencing also our physiological responses.
100%, yes.
Okay, so if you really believe that monitoring system is helping for you, so I think the athlete should use it. I mean, you cannot change the idea of impose the idea of subjective monitoring to an athlete that has never been trusting on own perceptions or trust better what this testing monitoring is saying. So we should, I mean, help them to develop this interoceptive awareness slowly. I mean, it's a process. It's a process where they will gain autonomy and they will be able even to co-design their training. But for now, what they do, they are copying, as we are all doing when we start. They are copying, and if they don't have a coach sensible to these things, they cannot evolve. So they cannot become more self-responsible, autonomous, with higher self-awareness or interoceptive awareness, and able to really monitor their training on the exclusive basis of this subjective monitoring. This is the final point. So I think we should respect everyone and respect the type of monitoring that is helping for everyone. I mean, they have different beliefs, they have different experiences, they are very different, in fact. So obviously, it is rare that they converge in one solution. It is much normal that they find personal solutions and explore them in order to find their best in every moment, which is not always the same, of course, because the dynamics is changing the context as well. So, and perceiving is embodied. So we perceive when we act. So in fact, it is good they explore many possibilities, because the perception is nourished by all this. And I mean, this is the way, not fixed way, not fixed receipts. We are not going to tell you this is good, this is bad, this is adequate or inadequate, depending on the context. I mean, and many things can be adequate, not just one. So this is also important to take into account.
Well, here's the approach that I've had to take as a coach, because it's been proliferated, right? All the objective monitoring systems and training quantification systems, they're just everywhere. Is I don't fight them. I try to put context and education around them. Mm-hmm. Instead of just saying, oh, no, don't do this. I don't want you to have an Oura ring. I don't want you to have a Whoop strap. I don't want you to monitor temperature, heart rate variability, or whatever. Natàlia, to your point, it's okay to go ahead and monitor it. If you believe that it's valuable, let's go ahead and monitor it. And it's my job to contextualize it and then to educate the athlete around it. But I will say, it is not easy. Like, I pull my hair out weekly because it's always something new. There's always some wrinkle, and it's always a lot of, I don't know. Like, I don't know. I don't know what the right answer to this turning yellow and this turning red and this turning green, and trying to mold all of those indicator lights into an action. Sometimes I just don't know how to make sense out of it all.
The point is also that if we use only objective information, this hides the subjective information in some way, or we can forget the outstanding possibilities of this subjective information. And starting from what we say, that subjective monitoring is the most integrative information that we can have, and we have to reevaluate this and educate athletes to enhance their awareness. Then we can use also objective monitoring as a complementary tools, because there are like some pathologies or some symptoms that maybe we are unable to detect, or we are not trained sufficiently to detect, that objective monitoring can provide. And this is is this balance that I think that we have to found, but we have to start from reevaluating more the potential of subjective information.
There's this context that's predominantly used in the objective world. My colleague Marco Altini, who I've had on this podcast, and I'll leave a link to that podcast as well in the show notes, that he would certainly say this at this point in time, is that if you have garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. If you're taking in irrelevant information on the objective side, you're going to get irrelevant information on the output side of things, garbage in, garbage out. But the same is true subjectively. And as you guys mentioned, it's a skill to be honed, right? And if the athletes hone that skill well, it can be a very powerful complementary piece. And all of these pieces are complementary pieces of information. They all complement each other. But it can be a very powerful, a powerful complementary piece of information, and it gets more powerful the better the athlete is at it. So I'd like to hear from you guys' perspective. How would you counsel athletes to get better at providing subjective feedback, so they can interpret their own training notes, or their coach can better interpret their own training notes? And I'm totally asking this from a selfish point of view, because I'm trying to get athletes to put better subjective information into their training log that I can use. And sometimes I just don't have the best way to articulate it. So how would you counsel athletes on that?
I think that athletes do what they learn from coaches.
So it's all our fault anyway.
You are a very key. You are a key agent in the context of the athlete. Okay. Right. So in a very natural way, when you change your way of thinking, they will change their way of thinking. So you don't need to make any effort in this sense. It's like parents, they should not say what to do to the kids. Simply, they should do it. And then the kids learn it. That's it. It is so, we are like this. Okay. So complexity matching. I mean, even in conscious way, these changes are produced. So you are very important for your athletes. So if you take care of yourself and you use for taking care of yourself, this self-regulation of your health, for instance, you are teaching them without this idea to impose nothing, but you are teaching them of what is better for your health, because we are talking about athletes, but this is not important just for athletes. This is important for the whole population. I mean, the whole population have so many possibilities to self-regulate their health state. I mean, but we have not been educated for it. When we go to the doctor, they say, okay, I prescribe you this and this, you should do this and that, and that's it. I mean, they see you, for instance, once a month or every 2 months, but you are with yourself 24 hours. I mean, you know yourself better than anyone else. So you don't need to go to the doctor to ask how I am, or go to the monitor to ask, or to the clock to say if I slept well or not. Yeah. I mean, what are we doing? I mean, we are losing our main properties, and we should move from this direction and really potentiate, not just with athletes, with the whole population, this idea that we are able to self-regulate in a very personal way, which is very individual. I mean, what is good for you is not good for another person, and what is good now for you won't be good in few years, for instance. So this needs something very much with these capabilities of integrating online all these dimensions and so on. So this needs this potential to do it in an accurate way. So,
well, many athletes will identify with the what I'm going to call mental skills or mental tools of awareness and self-regulation, and deploying those mental skills more in real time. And that's typically the context that a lot of sports psychologists and mental coaches will they won't directly take it, but it's the ones that the athletes usually interpret it as something that they're deploying during their activity, during the run. I need to learn how to lift this bar correctly, right? I need to learn how to regulate my effort in real time. But what you're saying is, and add some nuance to this, or correct me if I'm on the wrong track here. What you're saying is those same skills of awareness and self-regulation can also be used in an after the fact monitoring capacity to help facilitate not only contextualizing that training session, but also to help facilitate what can actually come next. So it's a real-time skill during the activity, but then it's an also after the fact skill as well that can be deployed for future use.
yeah, and not just mental. I mean, it's not just on the brain. This intelligence is in our body. I mean, all our cells are acting in an intelligent way. So this perception is not just mental exercise. I mean, it comes from all our body, and we should, it's embodied perception. Mm-hmm. So not mental perception just, but embodied perception. It does not take some few senses. No. We are full of these receptors in our body. And I think as much we are aware of it, we become more aware that we are so much intelligent. We have so much capabilities. We can improve that. We can learn from it. We can use every action, every experience in our life to improve, to learn from it and become more intelligent. So in this sense, so it's not a question to leave it to the psychologist. I think coaches should have a potential to integrate different dimensions and should integrate all those dimensions to become good coaches. And pity that they are not aware and they are not self-confident enough, not so well educated to be more confident on their knowledge and capacity to integrate knowledge. So needed for coaching. It's not that.
I want to peel apart. Go ahead. You guys. I want you to jump in here.
I just would like to add that this evaluating process of subjective information is not in a short time scale. No, it's not only you cannot do it in one session or in 2 days. You need probably months and years. So you need to start. It's better to start from childhood, no, from when you're learning about your body, about your mind, about your environment. And this is the best way to start training the people from their early stages, no? And then when you improve these values, then motivation to feel this change of perceptions changes also, and then your attention and your perception will increase and will improve this subjective monitoring.
You know, the long-term approach of this, I think, is extremely important because it's something that demonstrating improvement or the attempt to demonstrate improvement in an objective sense is usually rather easy and trivial, right? Your lactate threshold power was here in January of 2020, and it was there in January of 2022. And we typically extrapolate that to you're more fit, and we can leave that argument for later whether or not that is the case. But Natàlia, to your point that it can be improved upon, doing that in a subjective form is actually quite hard, but you actually can do it. I mean, I have athletes that I've coached for 4, 5, 6, 7 years, and I can look at their post-activity comments from 4 years ago and compare them to their post-activity comments now, and you can absolutely see when you look at them in whole, and that's an effort, right? That's a lot of reading, right? A lot of reading and thinking about what they actually have written. You can actually see the transformation in that format. And interestingly enough, this just happened to me yesterday. I didn't even think about it until you just brought it up. I've had athletes who have given podcast interviews about their training, not to me, but to another host. And it's markedly different from 2 years ago to where it is now in terms of how they interpret and how they explain how their training is going and how their season has gone. And some people would call that maturity, but I would call that just self-regulation and awareness, to use our earlier pieces of vocabulary of what's going on and the improvement in that. So to kind of wrap all of that up, I think the listeners can I hope what they can appreciate is that these things are A, important, B, an improvable skill, and C, all you really need is to sit down after your workouts and try to add some sort of subjective context to it, whether it's writing a paragraph or using some sort of training application or something like that. That becomes an integral part in the process if you do it consistently.
Yeah, but also in this way, subjective measures, as rating of perceived exertion and other measures that tried to put a number of your
right. The objective subjective measures.
Yeah, this also have some limitations because sometimes it's kind of difficult to express even in words the own perception of the multiple dimensions. Yeah. So this way the education it's also needed for athletes, for helping them to express their feelings as best as possible.
And getting back to the pragmatic point of this, where would you have athletes start? Because you guys know, and you're an endurance athlete yourself. I know that these people, and Natàlia, you've been doing this for a long time, right? And you have run into all different types of athletes and coaches. The athletes that go in and they punch their watch at the beginning of the training, and then they punch their watch at the end of the training, and then that's it in terms of how they're monitoring it. I probably did that this morning on my run, in effort of full disclosure. But if they want to start to incorporate this style of monitoring, what advice would you have for them to just start? They recognize that it's important. Where do they need at least start? What's the lowest common denominator to get the ball rolling?
I think it is good from one side to understand that there are some misconceptions when trying to connect values of lactate, for instance. You mentioned that, this lactate, it looks like who knows what. But then, this is when we understand our body as a network of embedded in networks, is it important a quantitative value of a molecule to relate it cause effect with our performance? This is a wrong understanding of how our body works. We cannot go from molecules, and we cannot explain what's happening at action level through behavior of molecules and quantitative values of molecules. Our system is full of synergies at many levels that compensate all these values, possibilities to compensate these values. So I think, first of all, these assumptions should be broken from one soul. This is wrong. And this is probably due to this science in exercise physiology that has promoted this idea of cause-effect relationships and so on among bioenergetics, especially in your specialty,
right.
you know. So it's an energy problem. Come on, you cannot reduce, this is reductionist point of view, to all this performance to the amount of energy or to lactate or to. So first of all, it is to break with this. It is education on this and why it is this, how is our body really behaving, how it is acting, how performance is reached, how we get injured, how, and when this understanding changes, I mean, it is more easy to start, changing their views on feeling differently how their body works, not thinking on the lactate or mal-lactate, my heart rate and so on. No, tell them at 160 beats per minute, you can die from heart attack. So what is 160 or 110? I mean, this is not the main point. We've been relying very much on this, and exercise physiology has helped on this, but this is very limited. It's a very limiting way of thinking. We should go ahead and understand better that our organism is something else, and it is not the simplicity of cause effect from a molecule to. But this is also, I mean, reinforced by medicine and reinforced by pharmacology. I mean, as much as all depends on molecules, intervening on molecules is a solution, okay?
Right.
Okay, but then their benefits keep on. I mean, this is working a bit this way. I mean, network physiology of exercise, if you like to read about this a little bit more, you can put network physiology of exercise. There are several open access now articles or chapter where this idea about how our body works is totally changing. And I think it's more close to what really is. I mean, as a theory, is a bit more closer to what we are than a machine.
So recognize the complexity and try not to make it so reductionist.
Right.
Is what I'm
right.
hearing for you. Yeah.
This
I know, I get it.
Yeah. I would also like to add, related to your question, to give some like pragmatic advice to coaches and athletes. I think that it's interesting for athletes to explore their perceptions in different contexts, like in cold, in hot, in altitude, in different intensities, different recoveries, eating this, eating that, and able to detect the change of how they feel and how they respond to that. And this is the best way to train your perceptions and to feel, okay, today I'm not good for doing that intervals that were planned, or today I can do it because I'm feeling good, I'm feeling motivated. So this is one of the ways that we can enhance this awareness and be more precise in our perceptions, to explore different contexts.
So look at the differences and how you react to those differences. I think that's a good way. It's a good way to start, because it's initially the simplest, right? I was like this when it was hot, and then like this when it was cold. This was yesterday. This is today. Those compare and contrast is a good door opener.
Yeah, I'm following a rigid plan. So today I have to do this, and it doesn't matter how I feel. I have to do this. Well, we have to discuss about it. So yeah, maybe you can start with the planned intervals, but if you don't feel good, you have to stop, or just doing for postponing for tomorrow. Yeah.
Well, in endurance running, in endurance sports being such a routine endeavor, we go out and we do 98% of the same thing day after day after day. It actually offers kind of the best compare and contrast, as you just mentioned, right? Because of that routine nature. So I think that that's a great way for athletes to start. That's a great place to end the podcast, you guys. Thank you for writing this paper. As I mentioned earlier, the links to it will be in the show notes. Thank you for your work that you've done in this, because it's made me think a lot about my coaching practice. And I hope a lot of other coaches and athletes, it makes them think and recognize that we are complex systems and we can't simply reduce it to pace and power and miles per week. And Natàlia, to your point, how much lactate is flowing around in our blood at points in time. So thank you guys for what you do. And I hope to bring you guys back on the podcast at a future date.
Thank you. Pleasure, Jason. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jason, for your invitation.
All right, folks, there you have it. There you go. Much thanks to Lluc and to Natàlia for coming on the podcast today. I love this topic. It is one that is very near and dear to my heart, and something that I've continued to focus on as my coaching career has developed. And I also think it is something that athletes can get better and better at, in terms of making sure that they are including some type of subjective feedback within their training and feedback process. I can't tell you how much I have enjoyed getting back into the podcast groove, although this is the first one that is going to be released after my recent hiatus. I have a number of other podcasts that are already booked that I'm already super excited about a ton of contemporary topics that have started to hit the social media sphere, and things that I'm sure that you all will be curious about. So this will continue to come in your ear holes every Thursday, a new release every single Thursday, with coaches and sports physiologists around the world about the most relevant topics for endurance athletes and ultramarathon runners. I will also be at the running event the week after Thanksgiving. It's an annual running industry trade show in Austin, Texas. So if you are there, hit me up on social in advance. We can go get some great Austin barbecue or a beer. And I'd love to pick anybody's brain who is out there about what is up and coming in the running space. That is it for today. I appreciate the heck out of each and every one of the listeners. And as always, we will see you out on the trails.